for Skellige's glory. All right. All right, and then I'll get some lunch. Skellige has a lot of faction identity you're going to love. A lot of unique cards that have stayed the same and some really cool new faction identity stuff. Skellige is your raiding and pillaging Viking faction that still loves discard, that still loves resurrection, that has a renewed love for self-wounding, that still cares about pirates and ships, and finally has a new ability called Bloodthirst that really makes you want to go aggro on your opponent. All right? So we'll talk about the new ability, and that's Bloodthirst. This is actually a keyword. I'm not making this up. This is actually a keyword. So we'll look at the... let's see, which card shows us like a bunch of different effects here. Let's just look at the Clan Dimun Pirate. All right, so the Skelligers are they're bloodthirsty, and this guy is definitely looking pretty bloodthirsty. Clan Dimun Pirate Captain is a 4 provision unit with 3 strength. As a deploy effect, Bloodthirst 2, damage an enemy by 3, reach 2. So, why would this card have so much stipulation around damaging an enemy by 3? Well, you know what? For 4 provision, getting a 3 ping is decent. So what's the stipulation? Well, you can only use this effect on deploy if the number of damaged enemy units required to trigger this ability are on the enemy's side. Overrides prior listed abilities. Now, I don't know what that means, but there's probably a card that explains that. So in layman's terms, this card is a 3 strength unit that deals 3 damage if 2 units on your opponent's side of the board are damaged. All right, so that's the base level. And this is the most quote-unquote boring card that exists. Also, this card is a pirate. Cards care about pirates. Also, this card is reach 2. Really important when removing stuff on the melee row, where highly removable things tend to be, because very strong effects sometimes are restricted to the melee row, because it automatically makes those units more vulnerable. So again, we're talking about offensive, melee, defensive, ranged. That's present in the game in spades, all over the place. That is very, very, very present. Position matters. And this is like not even a card that really exemplifies it, but when you're talking about how valuable a 3 ping is, being able to play this safely in that the strength is secure on the ranged row and still be able to hit things on the melee row is a good thing. And there's just a value associated with that. So if we're saying that that matters at all, putting that on the lowest provision point card is important. So there's my rant about all the things that this card tells me. Let's talk about more Bloodthirst. Let's take a look at some Skellige tech right here. Drummond Warmonger. Also a pirate. That sound effect is really... Now, I don't know what the game volume's at, so I pause when the premium sounds are playing, just to make sure that I'm not fighting for volume on that. Now, Drummond Warmonger is actually... pretty good. 5 provision cost for 5 strength at the low end of the spectrum. The thing about 4 to 6 is that getting a 7 net value card for 4 is usually really, really good and above rate. Getting a 7 net value for a 6-point card may relatively feel like a bad rate, but in general, 4 to 6-point provision cards, they don't feel too much different, which means that in deck building, when it comes to filling gaps, you generally either are making a trade-off of spending a higher rate on a card, but getting tribal synergy with something you're going to do, flexibility in that you're probably getting tech out of it, like here with the Warmonger, or the synergy is just so good that they have to cost it high. So when you look at a neutral card like this, which is the Bandit Bombers, the Bomb Heaver, this is a very similar card. Now, it's not a strictly worse. It's not a strictly worse Clan Drummond Warmonger, because this Bomb Heaver is also a 6 provision card, but it comes in at 4 strength. It destroys an enemy artifact. Now, the Drummond Warmonger is 5 strength for 5 provision, so strictly better in that respect. but it also can destroy an artifact, so now it's even better. However, at the same time, it cares about Bloodthirst, so its effect has a condition, but also at the same time, it has to be played on the melee row to get that effect. So it has a condition there as well. So you can really look at the evaluation of this card and techs in general that involve destroying enemy artifacts. Sorry about the premium volume. And like when you're making evaluation, like decisions, and you're really looking at cards like, I don't know, I think it's too easy to remove artifacts. Think about how this card has a harder time removing it than a Bomb Heaver, which is also a neutral option that everybody has. And you look at stuff like Warmonger, which is, if you're playing Skellige, you're likely able to trigger this anyway. Get a benefit out of Pirate, get a benefit out of anything that cares about Bloodthirst cards, and also play tech at the same time. So some people, which, I mean, I already said, I'm not going to call out streamers. This isn't even a negative thing at all. But I'm just going to put it out there that the feedback I received and I've seen are legitimate pieces of feedback from people that play this game a lot. So there is one player in particular that thinks that artifact removal might be too well costed. So I don't think it matters who I say it is, but if you follow him, you'll know, because he'll probably say that. So the jury's out on that. The jury's out on artifact removal in text. What does Donar do? I actually forget. We've got Donar coming in. The 7 provision cost 4 strength unit with the deploy effect that damages an enemy by 3. Now that's pretty good. We kind of see that in the Dimmin Pirate Captain, because he's a 3 strength unit that damages by 3. So Donar is 3 more provision points. So where do I get the value? Well, if Bloodthirst is qualified, Bloodthirst 2, so 2 damaged enemies need to be on the board. You damage an enemy by 5 instead. Now 5 makes Donar premium removal, and just similar as the Drummond Warmonger, which becomes premium tech, this card goes from being a bad rate card without its synergy to a fantastically rated card as far as value with its synergy. And you are probably meeting this synergy. Now you might be saying, oh man, there's so much boosting effects in the game, and Scoia'tael and Northern Realms, they care about boosting so much. It's going to be really hard to trigger Bloodthirst because there's going to be so much boosting going on. Well, I'm just going to show you a card that makes me think that Bloodthirst is going to be alive and well, in that we have cards that show up like Ulthuan. Now, this is one of my favorite examples for Bloodthirst and the aggro and control side of Skellige that's going to start showing up now in this review. You have Ulthuan, or Ulfheiden, depending on what you believe is the correct pronunciation. 7 provision unit for 4 strength units, a gold card. On deploy, damage an enemy by half its current power. Now, before you freak out, the cards in this game are generally lower in value, and the cards that tend to play higher bodies also tend to run resets. So this card may be good, but the meta will dictate that. The good news is this has 2 reach, which means that your 4 strength is more or less safer. The other good news is that 7 provisions is not that bad, considering this is a really good effect in that it creates a damaged unit on the board that is less likely to be healed up, which means your Bloodthirst is more likely to matter. But it also means that you can activate this awesome 4 provision point card that Skellige has, Tuirsark Axeman. Tuirsark Axeman is a dirt cheap 4 provision card at 2 strength that straight up destroys an enemy with half or less than its original power. Well, Ulthuan just created a unit like that. Now, the thing to note is that both of these are deploy effects. So you can't do this on the same turn. But if there's already a unit at half its original strength, and considering this is a 4 provision card, even if you only get like 4 strength out of a unit, I mean, it's less likely that you're going to get that, because that means you probably already pinged an 8 strength unit pretty hard. But you're probably getting 3 from this card, but 3 with a soft unlimited ceiling. So this card can get you actually high value in some very specific situations. so it becomes meta in that way. But even if it gets you 3 value, it still is removal, and it still can synergize with what you're doing and doing a lot of damage to your units. So again, just a great, great example of synergy that's coming in with Skellige in this new Bloodthirst and damaging, rampaging, pillaging, Viking insanity that Skellige is doing. But I'm going to move on. There's a lot of cards that do really cool things like that, and you'll see that kind of in the didn't change list, because there's a lot of cards that do damage in Skellige already. So I'm going to move on because there's lots to talk about. I want to talk about Resurrection, or Graveyard Play, which of course you want Skellige to have a lot of. And boy, does it. Look how many cards care about the graveyard here. Now, the thing about this, we're talking about things like Northern Realm Specters, and how Northern Realm Specters seems like it has a really strong archetype in control Specters, but doesn't seem to have a lot of units and support. Now, on the surface, I think that that's not true, but when you compare it to Skellige Discard and Skellige Graveyard Play, Skellige has a lot of support. Now, this probably has to do with 2 of the leaders caring about the graveyard. Sorry, is it 2 or 3? 2 of them definitely do. Yeah, only 2 of them care about the graveyard. So of course you're going to have more units, whereas no leaders in Northern Realms care about Specters. So you have that argument. But the other thing is, because 2 leaders care about discarding in graveyard, you could make the argument that you could play either one of those leaders and play Graveyard Play or discard at either time. Those 2 units, by the way, I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to leave you in suspense, guys. I'll show you the units I'm talking about before I go too high here. Why am I not seeing leaders? Because I'm already in a deck. Sorry. Because I'm already in a deck. That's why. So those leaders are Bran, which you saw on the dev stream, which is a live game that could have been anybody. Bran Twirsark is a 2 mulligan leader that has an order to discard a card and then draw a card, so essentially also have an extra mulligan. When you discard a card, you damage a random enemy by 1, which is random, so you can't plan on it, but it also cares about Bloodthirst, which you can do. Also, on round start, you can refresh this ability, which means you can do it 3 times in a game. So you can discard 3 cards in a game. That makes a 25-card deck in New Gwent, where consistency was a big concern, not that much of a concern. Also, like I said, there are so many discard cards. You can thin to 0 in New Gwent with Bran. The other card that cares about the graveyard is Est. Est is another 2 mulligan leader that plays a warrior from your graveyard. Now, I haven't done a lot of testing with Skellige yet, but there is a difference between this card, which plays a warrior from your graveyard, and the card Sigdrifa's Right. I think there's a big difference here in that Sigdrifa's Right, if you want this ability in Skellige, it's going to cost you 10, right? So Est gets that for free. And there's a lot of warriors, and that includes gold warriors. Gold warriors, there are good ones. So that's really important for Est. Sigdrifa's Right, also really important for Sigdrifa because her provision cost is based on the fact that you can also res gold warriors. But also, summoning and playing, I'm not quite sure, and maybe somebody in the chat if you know, summoning and playing may not be the same thing, because summoning is moving a unit from one location to another location, in this case, from a graveyard, whereas Est is playing. So I don't know for sure, I haven't tested it, but we'll test it. Whenever this stream ends, or whenever I get around to it, I mean, I don't know, there's only so many hours in the day, but I gotta test this one. But you know what, the first person that's gonna know is Gulo. So we'll know. Resurrection stuff. Yeah, so those are the 2 cards, the 2 of the leaders that care about graveyard. So when I typed in graveyard, you saw a lot of cards. So the people who were worried about graveyard play, don't worry. Now I'm going to show you a really boring graveyard card. Boring. Again, a card isn't boring if it gets you value and gets you synergy. Okay? It's only boring if you think it's boring, and it's only boring in respect to some of the crazy cards that that deal with graveyards, like Lippy Gurmund, which we already saw on the dev stream. So when I say boring, I don't mean boring. I mean a card that is the least interesting while still being very synergistic and cool. So maybe boring is a bad word to use. we can maybe think of a much better card to use. How about we just call them maybe core cards? But even this one isn't a core card because this one cares about graveyard and beasts. This is an interesting one because Skellige isn't necessarily caring about beasts as much as it does on live. And if anything, this is better in Arena, where there are actually a lot of neutral beasts, a lot of cross-faction beasts with monsters, and actually Scoia'tael as well. So this is a card that cares about beasts from an Arena standpoint. And if you're running a card like Bran, in Arena, if you put a bunch of beasts in the graveyard, this card becomes better. But of course, you also need to boost beasts as well. So the card that cares about graveyard and cares about beasts, this is one of the... I mean, there's still a lot out there for support here. Because if you play discard beasts, perhaps, that's a lot different than playing discard warriors. So not only does discard have its own archetype, it has 2 leaders that care about it. It also has 2 different tribal things that care about it. Because you got Savage Bear. I'm actually going to take back what I said. I think Skellige has a lot of beast synergy, and I maybe didn't get a good look at Skellige yesterday. Savage Bear is a beast at 4 provisions also, 2 strength. Gains a charge for each copy of this unit in the graveyard. Each copy of this unit in the graveyard. Order, damage a unit by 2, charge 1. So this card actually has a lot, there's a lot to look at with this card. Because it's a 4 provision cost card, so like again, it's dirt cheap. And it has an order effect that damages a unit by 2, which from a neutral rate is okay if you are getting... if you're getting kind of that neutral rate, if you don't get any synergy at all. So neutral cards are functioning on a rate of not a lot of synergy, or if there is synergy, then they tend to be more highly costed. It comes at more of a premium. With this card, it doesn't seem great because it has order, and Skellige doesn't work with Zeal as well as Northern Realms does. In fact, I don't believe there is Zeal for Skellige. So this card does need a turn to set up. However, if you have a copy of it in the graveyard, it gets 2 charges. Now it becomes a 6 net value card for 4, and it's already good. Plus, if you're playing a card that discards, what's going on? 265 Feral with the resub on Twitch Prime.
Commandos!
Thanks so much for the support from the Beard Brigade and the Commandos at patreon.com/commandershorn. 265 Feral, friend of the show. Thanks so much for coming by. So this card cares about the graveyard, cares about beasts, cares about charges, which is good in Arena and will be good in Arena. Again, Arena not implemented yet, but as a card that cares about charges and has orders, it cares about Zeal. So again, all of these things are factored in when it comes to evaluating this card, and this card is still at the lowest possible value. So while this card demands discard beasts in constructed play, but I think that this card actually ends up with some really interesting synergies in Arena as well. So it's going to be a really cool Arena card and a really cool constructed card while being a dirt cheap card. So again, a great example of a low cost card that does a little bit, but not in a boring way, and in its vanilla way, in its synergy way, and its highest potential really caters to synergy in many different ways, which is awesome. Just awesome. You get stuff like Raging Bear. Raging Bear is a 6 provision cost, 6 strength unit that is also a beast that damages an ally by the left by 1, but if there's no ally, it takes 1 damage instead. Now, Self-Wound is back in Skellige, so this card is definitely a card you play in Self-Wound, either because this card wounds itself, providing a trigger for that effect, but it also damages an ally, which provides a trigger for that effect. Queensguard is one of those cards, but I'll show that when I actually go into Self-Wound. But also, it's a beast. And it's also a beast that can go in the graveyard for discard beasts. And also, it has a decent rate if you can reset the unit or heal it. So this card's a really interesting card here, just got. We looked at Ulfheden. Morkvarg, I'm just going to say, the way Morkvarg is interesting because he's a beast, and that's interesting as well. But he's also an 8 provision card with 5 strength that has a spiritually the same effect. He comes back when he goes to the graveyard, which I believe happens between rounds and functions as carryover, but can only occur once, which means you can actually interact with it. It also means that you know, it's also showing where that premium of 5 strength is on removal. But man, does this card take that value away from you because it comes back at 5. So the cards you're playing that have this premium removal at 5 points, Morkvarg basically just absorbs that because your opponent is going to want to take away your carryover. So that comes at a huge cost to the opponent, which is good for you because you probably want to play this card anyway because of that reason and the potential carryover, but also because it's a beast. But this beast doesn't end up in the graveyard. However, if you discard it, it comes back from graveyard, as he does on live. And since we're talking about graveyard, we're also talking about beasts. That's not how you spelled Darren. We're also talking about graveyard. Man, wouldn't it be great if Brand's old effect was in this game? Now we have this new Brand, and we can't pick the cards we discard. Well, no, actually, instead, Skellige gets access to a card that is very low costed at 6 strength. It's a 4 strength unit, which is a decent rate for this effect. Move up to 3 cards from your deck to the graveyard. What a great setup card for discard, and you're playing Brand that's discarding every round. Or you're playing Est, which immediately pulls a card right out of the graveyard. Or you're playing Tworsark Skirmishers, which are the spiritual successor to Ancrate Raider. I'm parched, my friends. I'm parched. Very similar to Ancrate Raider in that this card comes onto the row from the graveyard. Now, I think this is appropriately costed for a couple of reasons, because this is only discarded, but it says discard from deck or discard from hand, and there are a lot of effects that do both. So this card is never coming from your hand, ever. It's also 2 strength. Also, there are cards that put your graveyard, cards in your graveyard, or in some cases, your entire graveyard, into your deck, which means that you can re-discard this card. So all of those things matter for this card. Plus, it's dirt cheap. Plus, it's a warrior for tribal. Plus, it's thinning. It just does it all, dudes. Plus, it's a discard trigger because there are cards like Vanilla Ancrate Longship, I believe, is the same card. There is a card that is still discard trigger, much like the Ancrate Longship. So that's a good discard card. We're talking about Skellige being the perhaps the new ultra-thin, hyper-thin faction. Not only are they discarding a lot, and not only do they have a lot of cards to support it, whether or not you're playing Bran or not, you can play any leader with this card and thin well. You get Dimoon Pirate. Kind of the same way in that Dimoon Pirate thins a card from your deck when you play it. Well, in live he thins 2 cards, but you know what I mean. 5 provision cost for a 5 strength card that moves the top card in your deck to your graveyard. Now, if you can control this, that's good. But if you can't, you're still thinning. Plus, maybe you don't care if it's in your graveyard because you're rezzing it, because you got lots of rezzes. Plus, maybe you want good stuff in your graveyard because you want to shuffle it back in your deck later. Because, you know, all of these things, like I said, there's lots of discard. Freya's Blessing is basically a very expensive Priestess of Freya, which doesn't exist anymore. This is how it appears now. Priestess of Freya is now a 7 strength special card that plays a bronze unit from your graveyard. So it's highly costed in that, like I said, bronze cards tend to top out at 7. So you want to try to hit like the highest provision cost unit to get that value. But keeping in mind that this is a bronze card and Skellige can add 2 of them. Graveyard play is a thing. Graveyard play is a thing because Necromancy is also a neutral 7 strength special card that plays a bronze unit from your graveyard. But the key difference is this is a gold card. Generically, any deck can only run 1 of these things. The second thing is Freya does not doom those units. So if you're playing a heavy discard, you play Freya to bring it back, it goes back in your graveyard, you bring it back again, or you shuffle it in your deck, or whatever. So Skellige could just do more. So if you see Necromancy and you're like, man, rip Skellige, they're supposed to be the graveyard faction, how are you going to give a res to neutral? They just gave a lot more to Skellige. A lot more. Gremist is another cool card that is double synergy. Double synergy for Gremist, 6 provision gold card with 2 strength that on deploy plays a bronze alchemy card from your graveyard. So this is good because you maybe put an alchemy card in your graveyard. This is also good because you can replay an alchemy card, and this is also good because there's a lot of decent alchemy cards. Okay? But this is also important because, for instance, just real quick, I want to show Coral here. Oh man, I hope that one didn't bust anybody's eardrums. I apologize. Coral's an interesting card in that this is a card. Now this is very niche. This is maybe more for Skellige control because again, this is a card. This is another way that CD Projekt Red is. I'm getting my words mixed up, guys. It's been a long day. Another interesting way that that CD Projekt Red is approaching how a deck is going to use its synergies best, and in this case, it's Skellige discard, and how it's going to approach if you want to play control Skellige, because every faction has a way of playing control, and every control archetype for each faction seems to have ways of getting extra value out of special cards. And in this situation, Coral, who I believe is pretty good, as a 9 strength provision unit, sorry, a 9-point provision unit, 4 strength, that has an order effect, discard a card, and draw a card whenever a special card is discarded, damage an enemy by 2, and she has 3 charges. So let's unpack this card. First of all, on the turn that she's available, sorry guys, on the turn that she's available, she can discard 3 cards from your hand and draw a card. Like, on a surface level, that's nutty. Now, she is Order, and Skellige cares more about Orders more because Orders are more vulnerable units in every other faction except for Northern Realms. So she is slower. So she is vulnerable. You can interact with her. You can lock her. You can kill her. She's only at 4 points. So that's important, but boy, what a great effect. But then she has this additional perk, which, by the way, 4 strength and 3 discards on Order, I think is already fairly costed. You're already kind of getting your value, considering all the synergy. But then you get this added perk, which I think is just kind of a bonus card text. When a special is discarded, you get to damage an enemy by 2. So now you get this extra synergy if you're running control, because you're encouraged to play special cards. And, you know, I keep saying this stuff because when I say running control and special cards, I'm really specifically referring to cards like Alzur's Double Cross. Now, this is a spell, but I'm just kind of using this as a very baseline example of what removal is. So when you get cards at 4 provision cost and you find them reaching 7, 8 in strength, it's a great rate for that card, and you're playing it, especially if it's synergistic. As a neutral card, you're paying 6 provision for premium removal at 5 points of damage. 5 points of damage removes a lot of vulnerable units, but it's expensive for the net strength you get. So in general, control is highly more valued than boosts. Depending on the faction, because some factions care about boosts more, and some factions care about damage more. Now, Skellige is one of those factions that cares about damage. So that's another important thing to consider when talking about Skellige control. But we also have things like Becker's Rock Slide, which I showed during the ADA Northern Realms preview. You're playing a lot of these special cards that are just really, really, really great control cards. Becker's Rock Slide kills almost anything. It is one of the most well-costed control cards, because when you look at a card like Scorch, which does scorch things, but is costed at 10, you have a card like Karathi Heatwave, which is a card that can destroy any unit or artifact. Any unit or artifact. That's a 14-point card. You think that's a powerful effect? 14 points is a lot for your deck. Also, when you look at Becker's, 8 is usually good enough to destroy almost anything. It's a unit only, but 8 is good enough. So when you think about, if you think about this as an emergency, I gotta kill this card. Becker's Rock Slide, 9 provisions, 8 damage. If you look at Karathi Heatwave or Scorch as a card that fills that same role for you, a special card that I gotta play this card to answer a threat or I'm screwed, Becker's Rock Slide gets you the biggest rate and only leaves like very, very few cards out of reach. Cards that are immune are out of reach, but then that's where Scorch is a little bit better. And cards that boost themselves beyond 8 then have like really strong order effects are out of reach. And then you kind of feel stuff on live like Redanian Idol X being out of Thunder Reach, what that means to balance and what that means to cards that can survive high levels of removal thresholds. So the cards that can survive this better be damn good. And there's not a lot of them. So I think that this card is super, super, super good and goes into any control deck, and any card that benefits playing special cards plays this card and loves it and is better off for it because their control archetype is even better. But we're talking about Skellige, because Skellige, Alchemy, sorry, I have like a bunch of stuff in front of my keyboard, so I do have a hard time teaching. Talking about Skellige is the pièce de résistance in why you would care about control, Skellige, and Alchemy, and Becker's Rock Slide, and all this removal, and doing damage for Bloodthirst, and doing damage for Axeman, and doing damage for all this other control stuff. The final thing comes together in Alchemy, in that Alchemy is Skellige's awesome tutor thing. But Skellige has a lot of great Alchemy support because Gremist plays Alchemy cards from your graveyard, which maybe you're discarding because you're playing a discard leader. But we've been going, you can kind of hear my voice. I'm getting a little parched. So what I'm talking about right now is control archetypes, Skellige in particular. I just finished a long tirade on how Becker's Rock Slide is one of the best priced control options in the game, and any card that cares about discarding cards for Skellige is good because you have 2 leaders that care about it, and any cards that care about any cards that care about discarding specials, of which Coral, I'm not going to go through that premium again, but Coral is one of those cards in that she cares about the specials. Also, she like discards 3 cards for you, and she's like super, super good. I can do this actually now because I can just turn off premiums, I guess. So this card cares about discarding cards and discarding specials, which encourages you to run less units and more specials, which is what control wants to do anyway. And now we're talking about how Alchemy helps Skellige in their very, very specific control archetype. So in Skellige specifically, all these cards... Wait, is Mardro... Mardro is Skellige specific. I actually didn't know that. Oh, that makes so much sense. I thought Mardro was really, really good. It's actually really, really good because it's Skellige. Okay, I thought it was super good. So we have Ermion, which tutors an Alchemy card. You have Runestone, which is an Alchemy card that's probably creating you some synergy in your deck. Now, we talked about Create, we talked about Runestones, we talked about the price you pay for the Runestone, we talked about average provision cost of bronze cards, in that Create is probably well priced because the top end of bronze cards are provision cost 7. However, Runestones are more than likely going to give you synergy because there's so much more synergy in the game now, so you're more likely to get either a 3 of something you really want, or synergy that works with what you have. So Runestone, I think, is a fair choice. I think it's well priced. Whether or not it's balanced or not, I'm not sure, because you can't get tech stuff out of Runestone. And I don't want to create an answer. I don't want to create an answer if I got to destroy an artifact, and boom, there's the Drum and Warmonger. So I'm worried about that, but it's still an Alchemy card, so that just means it's better for Skellige. Gremist plays Alchemy from your graveyard, and Mardrome is an Alchemy card that's pretty damn good, because it damages a unit by 3, which Skellige cares about, and it boosts something by 9. If you're playing Self-Wound, that's really good, considering stuff like any card that needs to be damaged and boosted, like, you know, the Drummond Queensguard or the Drummond Shieldmane, like, there's just so much. So Skellige has had all the Alchemy cards geared towards damaging and wounding and stuff that actually works with discard, and we haven't even looked at the neutral Alchemy cards, because here are the really cool stuff. You have stuff like Protection in Mahaka Mail, being able to unlock. You have Dimeridium Shackles as control. Again, we're talking about maybe control Skellige. Maybe you're running one of Dimeridium Shackles. You run one of Dimeridium Shackles. Ermion's pulling it for you when you need it. Gremist is replaying it in a matchup where you need it more. Plus, it just functions well with your control. Plus, it does damage. Bloodthirst cares about that. Damage triggers care about that. Dimeridium Shackles is a really good neutral lock card, although a lot of factions have better stuff, especially Nilfgaard. But this card is automatically better in Skellige. Automatically better, but still a viable neutral option, depending on the meta, depending on how control you want to be. Super, super cool and very relevant for Skellige that this is Alchemy. And you see 3 other very, very strong Alchemy cards in what they're costed, in that if you are playing a control deck and you want to make use of a lot of special cards, and you want to make use of specials, so making use of discard and specials, considering you have cards that can play cards out of the graveyard, cards that can set up cards in the graveyard like Darren, cards that can discard like Bran, cards that can play cards from the graveyard like Sigdrifa or Renew or whatever. You have ways of putting all these Alchemy cards in your graveyard and using them that way, or you have ways of playing them from your hand, discarding them from your hand, getting extra bonuses from them. Plus, you're playing control, so you're playing less units and more spells. Okay, I've probably said that a lot, but you saw, you know what? I had to drink water, but you saw Dimeridium Bomb, which is tech. You could probably just add one of, because now Drummond Warmonger, maybe this is better because it's automatically an Alchemy card and it's a special card. So you might find more value in this card if you don't want to play units. But if you do want to play units, you're probably running Drummond Warmonger, which means that either control or pirate-based stuff or Bloodthirst-based stuff. Skellige has lots of different ways to deal with artifacts. So again, if you come from Pumpkin Stream, you might have talked about artifact removal cost. Skellige has a fairly good rate for that. You also saw Swallow Potion, 6 boost coming out of the graveyard, coming out of the deck. It's pretty good. 6 is like a fairly high number in the game right now, especially if you're protecting a unit that needs to be protected and you're doing it in the turn that you're playing that, because I believe one of the alchemies is one of the alchemy triggers is an order. But there might be a way of doing that. And then I showed Golden Froth, which is one of the most expensive bronze cards in the game. But the expensive bronze cards are special cards and generally not units. Again, so this is important for Runestone because you're not going to Runestone a Golden Froth. But Golden Froth is a card that tells you a lot about the game. Now, this is not a control card. So everything I said about control, just forget that about this card. But it is an alchemy card. So Gremist cares about this card, and Ermion definitely cares about this card, because playing this card twice, oh man, you'll pay a premium for that if you're playing swarm-based stuff or you're playing row stacking. So row stack is alive in this game because this card exists as a neutral card. Plus, you can replay it with Gremist, which is very good. You can tutor it with Ermion, which is very good. And you can build a row because, you know, aggressive strategies are probably going to build melee row anyway. A lot of really strong abilities are melee row only, and you probably want to do a lot of damage because you want to trigger Bloodthirst effects. So, why is this card potentially 18 points for 9 provisions? That's the question, because this card is super good because of that. And I think that Scoia'tael and Skellige, because this is alchemy, and anything that deals with special cards in a very, very favorable way can make a lot of use of this card. And this card's on my watch list because it kind of, I mean, 18 is the ceiling, but is it really a ceiling when you're only putting, like, 18 points is like the upper limits of what a card in this game can achieve. There's not a lot of cards. Even the cards with no ceiling probably are never hitting 18. With the exception of some of the really, really unanswered seizing stuff and scorching stuff. But I mean, that's the stuff you play around anyway. Golden Froth just seems easy to play. So this card is another card on my watch list, even though I feel like it's actually very well priced. Skellige is going to make a beer deck. And I mean, what better for the rampaging Vikings than a kind of a rowdy party with the beer flowing. So they actually made this Skellige centric because I really feel like it's a really good Skellige card. And because Row Stack is so good for Scoia'tael as well, it's also very good for Mahaka Mail. So just one more time for the flavor. that they were able to synergize in this game. I think it's like the 4th or 5th time I've just started randomly ranting about flavor when going through these cards. It's just another card that just has stupid flavor because it works for Skellige and Scoia'tael arguably the best. Because Scoia'tael's got the immune units, but this one doesn't care about immune. Scoia'tael cares about units on a row and tribal stuff on a row. And Skellige cares about alchemy, and they just want to brew some beer. It's so good, my friends. But man, I talked a lot about Skellige, dudes. I didn't even talk about self-wound. Pirates and chips are just some tribal stuff, so I'm just going to skip that. But I'm going to just talk about self-wound really quick before I go into the stuff that didn't change and we go to Scoia'tael and we wrap it up. And when I say wrap it up, I mean I take a lunch break and I come back and I do it all again. I'm dead serious. I'm dead serious. Okay. Damage. I looked up damage specifically for Skellige because there are cards that care about damaging themselves, and Queensguard is one of the coolest ones. This card speaks to me, dudes. Now, if you like Queensguards, you like lots of Queensguards on the board. You also like lots of Queensguards in the graveyard. You also like lots of ways to make use of lots of things in the graveyard that might be the same thing, or maybe being able to get the same thing, or whatever. So while Queensguard doesn't have the psychotic one-turn power potential it had in its maybe its strongest meta was the pre-Midwinter, early Salvine, whenever Gwent together was, because I know I brought Drummond Queensguard to Gwent together, and I actually practiced a lot with Delta. With Queensguard, it was a competitive deck. So there was a point in the game where Queensguard and discard Queensguard was a competitive deck. I feel like this has brought this card into the same league without being a discard card, strangely enough. But it is still a card that cares about multiple units. It is still a very Skellige card in that it really cares about self-wound. Praise be, because the self-wound stuff is pretty tasty. I know a lot of Skellige players missed self-wound. Also, shout out to the Brockfar Hunter effect coming back into the game. A card I didn't even really care about that much when it removed, because I didn't think Greatswords needed the help. But Brockfar coming back with the boost on adjacent unit getting damage stuff, I think a lot of people are pretty stoked about that. I would hope so. This card in particular, Drummond's Queensguard, and for the audio listeners, sorry, it took me forever to talk about this card. 6 provision for a 4 strength unit. With the order, which means that it can only trigger the next turn. If this unit is damaged, spawn a copy of it to the right. And that copy gets the order again. So very much like Kedweni Revenants, which we talked about earlier in the Northern Realms. The Northern Realms review, much like the Kedweni Revenant, which also copies itself and recreates its order. This card does the same thing. Now, it's also copying itself. Now, previously in Gwent, old school Gwent, closed beta Gwent, old school Gwent, really frowned upon the design direction of copying cards. And cards like Vanilla Full Test as a leader did that. It copied a card in play, which means it sent 2 of those cards to the graveyard, which means that cards that care about cards that have the same name or the same archetype get that bonus. Also, if it's a really good card, you still have a 3rd one in your deck in this version of Gwent that can only run 2 bronzes. So the concern was I'm copying cards and now I'm playing more and more cards, and cards like, you know, there are a lot of cards that really could abuse that kind of stuff. Like Northern Realms used to have a lot of reses. They used to have a lot of ways of tutoring stuff out that had the same name. So, you know, Reaver Scout, you'd copy a card and then you'd tutor it out and then you'd still have like 2 more of them in your deck. So like I can see why they didn't want to be down with copy, but there are actually a lot of copy cards. I'm going to take a quick aside and just talk about copy. Neckers copy themselves. Savage Bears care about copies of themselves. Scoia'tael Neophytes copy themselves. Moving up in provision cost, Drummond Queensguards copy themselves. Drummond Shield Maidens care about copies of themselves in the deck. Remember, you can shuffle your graveyard into your deck and shuffle cards in your graveyard into your deck. Okay? Just making sure. Reinforcement's a Northern Realm special card that spawns a copy of a bronze unit. Throwback to old Full Test. You better believe I love this. That was my favorite leader in closed beta. Full Test. Copy a card. This is huge for me as a Northern Realms fan. Fringilla copies... spawns a copy, which means that it puts a copy in your graveyard. Cursed Knight creates a copy of itself. Doo-Doo becomes a copy of something. Skellen copies a tactic card, doubles up on it in the same turn, puts them both in the graveyard. Caranthir spawns a copy at 1 power, Barnes Hearthstone style. Operator spawns a copy of a bronze unit on both sides of the row. Harpieg, your opponent isn't playing Death Wish. Sick card. Play this card. Letho copies itself into another card. Now, this isn't necessarily all going to be super synergistic, but you got to remember the way we think Arena might go, these cards all care about copies of cards. It's a weird synergy for sure, but if you're drafting Arena, believe me, I'm going to love the jankiness of drafting a copy of a card deck that cares about like 100 copies of the same card. And I'm doing that with cards like Slave Infantry, which actually doesn't have the word copy in its card text, but also does a similar thing, transform an allied unit into Slave Infantry. Not this unit, Slave Infantry. Considering that Vreemd is back as a sentry card, that's kind of where that soldier gameplay kind of lives spiritually. Spiritual successors is a lot of the stuff that we're seeing. But I was talking about... What was I talking about? Self-Wound. Self-Wound. Again, these cards, each individual card tells us so much about the future of game design. In that I can barely get into some of the most basic bronzes without just going on a tangent from all of the stuff that I've seen. And the design, the care and design and the weaving of setup of these cards. Here's the thing. Say what you will about the coin flip fix. Say what you will about the card draw between rounds. Say what you will about round length. Say what you will about anything. These are tunable things. Tunable. If we don't like 3 and 3 on the round end, if we really don't like it, and we can make a good case that it's not good for the game, and we will make good cases if it is not good for the game. And CD Projekt Red also really listened to our feedback already, although the 3 and 3 draw is something that was not changed. That's a key piece of info. What I want to say about the 3 and 3 and about all of the stuff that people might be concerned about, most of these things are tunable things. When it comes to flavor and design and archetype support and value for provision cost and rate of value for removal and copies of things and what cards do, even if they're crazy things, with the right tuning, you just have, and this is the only time I'm going to swear on this podcast, you have a good fucking card game. I'm actually, truly, no kappa, slightly emotional as I deliver that sentence. Because I've already gone on random tirades about how good the synergy is between factions for Arena, between factions for special cards like Alchemy, Nilfgaard, and how you can shut down your opponent's ability, but Ada in a control mirror cares about that and actually is specifically good for that kind of thing because Spectre Control cares less about units and Control Nilfgaard does care about your units because they care about lock. So even though Nilfgaard seems overpowered, Ada Control seems like an awesome counter in the meta. I've talked about humans and soldiers and how that goes through everything, the way organic works with monsters and how the monsters looks at control with immune units and damage. I just want people to understand where I'm coming from. Because there are going to be people that come into this open beta and there are going to be people that come onto Reddit and there are going to be people that come onto Twitter. There's going to be two kinds of people. I will excuse one of those kinds of people, and I will not excuse the other kind. The first kind of person I will excuse. This is the person that's going to come into Reddit and is going to come into Twitter and is going to say, this just doesn't feel like old Gwent. And I hate that. Even though there's going to be a lot of spiritually successive card effects, and even though I think Faction Identity has leaned into the stuff that Gwent players have loved for the longest time, even bringing back things that people love, if you say this game just doesn't feel like old Gwent, and I don't like that, you are 100% within your bounds to say that. As long as you are clear why. That is where I will excuse you. If you do not like this game, you are absolutely excused, because the game has changed a lot. The flow, the cards, what everything does, how everything interlocks in all the moving parts, the importance of the coin, the importance of passing, the importance of each round, the importance of tech, all of that has changed. I'm not saying for the better or for the worse. In a lot of cases, for the better. In a lot of cases, as far as deck building is concerned, the random elements of what you can put together in this game have changed for the better, in my opinion. But if you say this just doesn't feel like Gwent and I don't like it, you are allowed to say that, and I respect you. Just try to say why, and definitely tell CD Projekt Red why. Because if they can get it closer to the game we all want, they will do it. But, as you can see, they have already taken a lot of risks, and I don't think they're going to go back on a lot of these design decisions. So if you think that there's stuff missing and it's just non-negotiable for you, and it's a hill you're going to die on, that you can't play the game in the same way that you used to want to play, and it's a mechanic that it seems like Gwent has legitimately steered away from, while steering towards very dangerous mechanics like copy units and shut down leader ability and destroy mulligans, holy. Because they're making brave choices and they're not dumbing down the game. If anything, it's more strategic than ever. But if you really feel like something went away and it stinks for you, I understand. And I will excuse you. And I will respect you. And I actually want to hear your side of it. Because there is a flow issue with the PTR right now. It's just the turns are a little sluggish. I want it to be a bit more snappy like it is on Live. Live is going to feel, after you play this game, Live is going to feel like a very arcade version of Gwent. Live is going to feel like every card is so crazy strong, the numbers are popping all over the place, the turns end immediately, you're pulling everything out of your deck, it's all going all over the place, you're just crushing your opponent by like 20, 30, 40 points. That's how current Gwent feels. It's like arcade-style Gwent. The coins flipping, the sounds and everything. It's faster. The rounds are shorter. I love that about Gwent. I want that in this Gwent as close as possible without changing anything else that they've changed. Love the new board. The new coin is kind of gross. I don't like the new coin. I want that coin to make a sound. I want that coin to be different colors. I want that coin to have a face on one side. Like, what does that mean? At least say opponent's turn. I mean, whatever. The coin I don't like. But that's aesthetic stuff. Much like tuning and balance, this stuff gets changed sometimes. Especially cosmetic stuff. Maybe they'll let me spend meteorite dust on a new coin. I'm down. I'm down for that. Just tell me it's going to be okay for the aesthetic stuff I don't like. And the stuff that you guys don't like. Because if you're talking about aesthetic stuff, you're nitpicking, and that's such a good thing. Just going to finish Self-Wound because we have one more faction to go on, and I'm just going on rants. Premiums were off in that moment because the game volume is really loud, and some premiums have, like, screaming. So that was actually exclusively for Coral, because Coral has screaming in her premium. Mythic Pilot with something. I love the game. I love the game. Somebody just said I just came into the stream right now. I love the game. I love the game. I love the game. I love the leaders. They're so unique. I love the ways you can build around the leaders, and they're so unique, but you still can build around them in a bunch of different ways. You can build around it. You can build around Aridin because he's just good and he gets 4 mulligans. But you can also build him Wild Hunt style because Wild Hunt cares about big units. And immune means that the big unit stays on, but you can just play him because giving a unit 4 an immune is good. So it's like he works with what Wild Hunt is trying to do, but he's also just good. That matters for Arena. That matters for competitive deck building min-maxing. Okay? So I feel like all the leaders are like that. And when the leaders changed and I saw what the leaders were doing, considering the leaders are very, 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 very specific actions to your deck, and sometimes are the extra reach you have in your turn without playing a card, plus the coin flip fix, which actually changes the value of each of these leaders, because a lot of time you want to save your leader. You know, Phil Evandrel you don't want to, because he's better the earlier it is. And maybe Aridin you want to, because he's maybe protecting the unit you want to have protection. But that extra mulligan and that tactical advantage, it means so much in so many different ways. And you know why that's important? Because when you attempt to fix the coin flip, you don't want to just say fixing the coin flip is worth 5 points, because that's not what's being said right now. What's being said right now is that having 5-point reach is very important for the player who goes first. But it also means that different leaders, all of them, can make different use of this. Right? Because the tactical advantage is an immune artifact that you get that is worth nothing on your board, but gives you 5 points when you play it, and you can play it whenever you want. Somehow they have made almost every faction and leader give a shit about this. Because there are a lot of cards that need protection, and that means that in your round that you really want to win, you can protect that super important unit. Aridin can do this off the top of his head, plus he gets 4 mulligans. That's so good. Which means that the tactical advantage means more to Brandon, because it's almost like Aridin, because it's like he gets 2 of them. Now on red coin, Aridin is still super good, because you can still fight to win the round, because you can protect a really strong unit. But because you're playing your strong units, maybe more so in the first round, and finning and stuff like that, or playing other synergy cards, or doing whatever you need to do, by the time you get to round 3, or the long round you need to win, you got 4 mulligans to back yourself up, so you can find your other good cards, so you're not worried so much about having to play the strong stuff in round 1. You just need one protected strong thing, and all your bronzes work in Wild Hunt. You just need like one protected strong thing. Which means that using all 4 mulligans in round 3 means you're more likely to get your good cards. It's a little RNG, you need to depend on that, but honestly that comes at a value proposition that I am willing to accept for running Aridin. So some leaders are better on the blue coin. And then you got a card like Usurper that just turns everything around. Now if you're on the blue coin against Usurper, you have all your mulligans, unless Letho has... But then again, if you see Usurper, you might want to use all your mulligans right away, because maybe Letho's there. But you're also highly encouraged. You have an advantage on blue coin when all of your other advantages are taken away from you. The blue coin player actually has an advantage against what could be the most controversial leader in this game. The way the coin and the leader interacts is so interesting to me, and it's probably one of the most impressive things that I've seen outside of the general synergy of all the cards in the game, intermingling between factions, but also intermingling within factions, also intermingling within card types, also intermingling within archetypes like Control, which I've focused on personally. So do I like it? Yeah, I like it. That's one of the many reasons why I like it. Dudes, since I'm going to go through all these cards again, and I talked about Skellige a lot, I just want to say Self-Wound is a thing, Brockbar Hunter is a back, there's a lot of cards that care about Self-Wound, but we're going to move on to Scoia'tael because I feel like I'm really getting hung up. I'm really getting hung up on rants. But since this is the podcast, it's all going to be on there. Let's finally talk about Scoia'tael. So we just finished Skellige. Thanks so much for watching my Skellige review, my friends. Again, if you haven't signed up yet, playgwent.com/open-ptr. Everything's open, my friends. Let's talk about... Oh, wait. There is one more thing that I forgot to do that I've been doing for every faction. I'm just going to do it real quick. The cards that didn't change spiritually. Twisarch Skirmisher is spiritually Encrate Raider. Trophy Catch, while not a unit, is still Encrate Whaler/Whale Harpooner. Still has the same effect, but it is not a unit or a machine. It is a special card. Hame Scald is a bronze discard trigger. which is which is very similar to how Svanriga is. Demon Worship, the way it pings, is spiritually the same. Strubog Runestone is the same. We talked about that already in Alchemy. Darren is spiritually the same to Brand's leader ability. And Krieg Greatsword is spiritually similar to Axeman. Freya's Blessing is spiritually the same to Freya, Priestess Freya. Burner Brand is spiritually the same as Ermion. Morkvarg is spiritually the same as Morkvarg, although it only comes back once, but it's better in a bunch of other ways. Ceres is spiritually the same in that it comes out of the graveyard. Sigdrifa's Right is spiritually the same in that it is playing a warrior but can play gold cards, so keep that in mind when evaluating this card. Vabjorn is spiritually the same because he destroys an enemy that is damaged. Wild Boar of the Sea is spiritually the same because he is very similar to Live Ulfheden or Ulfheiden, depending on how you pronounce that. Ermion is still in the game because he is a tutoring effect, and I felt like I just wanted to show all the tutoring effects. There you have it. That's Skellige. Thanks for watching. Let's do Scoia'tael to wrap up our faction review for the Homecoming overview of faction identity.